Hi everyone! First of all, I want to apologize for the delay. We've had some technical issues, but hopefully everything is fine now. So welcome to another episode of World to Win. Now, I know you're not used to seeing my face so early on in the broadcast, but unfortunately, the legend that is Toya couldn't be here today. And oh boy, does she deserve a break. You know, it's the first episode of World to Win since the start that she's not on. So she really deserved this break. But unfortunately, that means that you're stuck with me. But don't worry, we still have a very exciting and well-packed show for you tonight. So don't forget to share it around. Everyone's going to find something interesting about this show. It's really, really interesting. So it's a guarantee. Share it around. Start watch parties. If you're on Facebook, share the YouTube link if you're on YouTube. And let's get to it. Now, as you know, we are live. So we want to hear from you. Let us know where you're watching from, and tell us one big thing that's happened in your region today, this week. We really want to know what's happening around the world. We know we've got watchers from all around the world, so that would be great to hear. Now, if you're wondering why I'm so excited about this week's show, it's because we have a lot to go through. So we'll be discussing the California wildfires with Rob from the US section of International Socialist Alternative. So hi, Rob. Then we're going to talk about the inspirational health and struggle protest in Belgium with Celia from the Belgian section of International Socialist Alternative. So, hey, Celia. And finally, we're going to talk with Michael from the Irish section of International Socialist Alternative about the heroic Debenhams workers' struggle. So, hi, Michael.
Hi.
And we know that these topics are really, really fascinating, and I'm sure you're going to have plenty of questions. So make sure to put them in the comments, and hopefully we'll have time to ask the panel a few of them. So without further ado, let's get going. As we all know, over the last month, we've seen record-breaking wildfires on the west coast of the US, which were burning millions of acres, killing more than 30 people, and forcing tens of thousands out of their homes. Now, it's not just the fires, it's the thick smoke that is a real health and environmental hazard, especially combined with the consequences of COVID-19 for our health. So, you know, the US today is going to pass 200,000 coronavirus deaths. So it's a really big issue that's going to be really exacerbated by the smoke from the fires. And the smoke doesn't only cover the majority of the US West Coast, it also spread across the US and even reached Europe. So it's a real international catastrophe. Now, this only shows the magnitude of the fires this year. So 5 out of the top 20 largest fires in California's history occurred in 2020. So Rob, can you tell us a little bit about the situation? How have the fires affected people in the US? And I also know that you're a construction worker. So how has the view been to you from the 33rd floor this past week?
Well, it's funny you should mention that because I have a couple of pictures. So I'm a construction worker. I work on the 33rd story in a San Francisco high-rise that we're building. And this is the normal view. Let's see if you can see that. That's the normal view out of the floor at noon. The previous week, we had the worst smoke crisis that anybody has ever known in the Bay Area. And this is what the same view, exactly the same view at noon with all the lights on and the rest of it. So about 110 million tons of carbon dioxide has been released into the atmosphere as a result of these fires. Like Yaara said, these fires are unprecedented. It is normal in California to have fires in October, November. August is unheard of, so it's starting earlier. Part of the reason it's starting earlier is that California is in reality in the 8th year of a drought. They actually called it a 7-year drought, and then there was rain last year. But in reality, we're back to hardly any rain. No rain in February, March, April, May, and so on, which is unusual. So that's actually a 1,200-year record, the current drought. So that is creating the fuel for these fires that are coming earlier in the season, with a much longer fire season, but also more intense and more rapid as well in their movement. So California is a very rich state, 40 million people. People have already been sheltering down because of COVID. now they're often sheltering down because you can't go out because the air quality is so bad.
That's insane. That's really, really insane. And like, we know the fires are record breaking in nature. And, you know, we, like you said, California is the richest state in the US. Like, in fact, it's the 5th biggest economy in the world. So as you said, it's also like there's a wildfire season. So how is it possible that California doesn't have the means to deal with this? Like, has the state done enough?
Yeah, well, the state does have the means to do it. It just doesn't have the political will because of the way in which politics is organized under capitalism. That is, I mean, you could almost call the Democratic Party the political arm of the oil industry. Oil is very big in California. California is the 6th biggest oil producer. But in terms of the inequality, which is one of the big issues with California and its huge wealth, is that if you are, just as we know, COVID affects everybody differently. There was a dude today in San Francisco got a $2.8 million bill from the hospital for his 61-day stay in the hospital. But also the fires affect everybody differently. Working class people that have their house burnt down, the insurance company will come back and say, we'll give you 20% instead of the full cost. And then they'll say, well, take us to court. And we actually had a comrade who was evacuated from the fires, and the smokes are the same thing. Very unequal experience for working class people. If you live in an apartment building, your windows are probably not sealed very well, and that toxic smoke is coming in. If you can't afford an air purifier, it's a pretty bad scenario. So this is, you know, this is a very bad situation for everybody, but it's worsened because of the economic structure of capitalism in California.
That is actually insane. First of all, the amount of money that you need to spend to protect yourself in an economy so big, and also the amount of money that you need to spend to treat yourself if something happened to you is just, it's absolutely insane. And I was wondering about like the firefighting services and all of that. We've been hearing a lot about that. So do you think that the state has enough firefighting resources to deal with the wildfires, and what can they do to deal with this?
Well, yeah, the short answer is no. The longer answer is that the current biggest fire is almost 1 million acres. On scale, Wales, for comrades in Britain, is about, I think it's about 5 million acres. So up and down the West Coast, the amount that has burnt so far is about 5 million acres. But the biggest fire is only 30% contained. So these are very difficult to contain, and they take a lot of human power and a lot of firefighting machinery and resources. And quite frankly, the state knew that the fire season was coming, and anybody could have told them it's going to be worse this year because of the lack of rain, and they did not prepare for it. We have thousands of firefighters out there working 48 hours, sometimes in 4 days in a row, 5 days in a row, sometimes with just nap breaks. And the firefighters union asked the governor back in February, I think it was, they wanted an extra 500 firefighters. That wouldn't have been enough. The state came back with 150 additional firefighters. So this is a situation where, you know, big business, they'll deal with the crisis after it comes, but they're not interested in investing in anything. It's all about extraction capitalism, you know, in California.
Yeah, I think it's actually insane because it's not, you know, a new thing that's been happening. It's been happening for years. And I think it really clarifies, like you said, the problem that capitalism has with dealing with things like that. Like, because people are actually dying, people are affected by this. Like, people, you know, everyone likes to say that we're all in this together about COVID in the same way about the fires, but that's not the case. You know, like, there are people who are affected worse, and there are people who can't afford to treat themselves as well. And it's just insane that the state that is so rich can't afford to pay for firefighters. And I was wondering, because you've said, and like we've said, that the fires are record breaking this year, even though they've been going on for so long. But why is this the case? Is it just like why is California seeing so many droughts? Why is California seeing those huge fires? Do you think that it's connected to climate change?
Well, the fires are natural to the forestry. The Native Americans took a very holistic approach to it and understood the necessity of fire, but unfortunately, with high housing costs, a lot of working class people are moving to more rural areas and commuting in, which does nothing good for the economy, for the ecology of the environment. So you've had a lot of people moving out to these areas. And in addition, the controlled burns, which California used to be quite good at, which is like restricted burns to help long-term fire suppression, that resources for that was cut back. And so there's much less money put into that. But the big elephant in the room is, of course, climate change. Globally, we've seen a 1 degree centigrade rise in the temperature of the planet, but that is uneven. In California, it's about 2 degrees centigrade. And consequently, we have everything is more extreme. And that's also true of the whole US. Yaara, I should mention that California is not the only place in trouble in the West Coast. We have Hurricane Sally right now in Georgia and Florida with this week with 100-mile-an-hour winds. We have 5 hurricanes sitting off the shore of the US that are simultaneous, and that's only the second time in recorded history that 5 hurricanes came at the same time. And I have a sister-in-law in Florida, and she knows November is usually hurricane season. Well, it comes earlier and earlier. So everything is being accelerated in terms of climate change for sure. And the one thing about climate change is if you don't do anything about it, it gets worse. And one last quick point on the volume of carbon dioxide released by the fires, that itself also will be a major contributing factor to global warming. That's 110 million tons of carbon dioxide that got released so far.
Wow, it's just insane to think about, such a small area compared to the globe that has so much going on right now, and all of it because of the way, like people talk about it as if it's like an apocalyptic dystopia or something like that, but it's not really. There's a clear cause to it, and we can still do something about it. But the way that the society is organized, or whether the economy is organized, is all around the profits, and the billionaires are still earning their money. So why would they do anything to stop this? Which is absolutely insane. But if we're talking about solutions, I think something the global media has been talking a lot about in the past couple of years is the Green New Deal. So I wanted to know, can you explain a little bit about what it is, and would we support it as socialists?
Well, I think we definitely support any dramatic action on climate change because we need it. California needs it, the US needs it, the world needs it as well. However, does it go far enough? So the AOC has put forward a plan for 100% renewable clean energy by 2030. That's a great step forward. That we would definitely support that. And that's compared to Biden, who's talking about 2050. We don't have that 20 years that he wants to, and the 2050 will be 2060, will be 2070, as all the previous talk about serious action on climate change. A part of the Green New Deal also is a 70% tax rate on incomes above 10 million. Definitely very good. Now, we're in favor of that, but within the framework of capitalism, you're constantly working against the profits of the corporations. It's almost impossible to get anything through them. So you can't control what you don't own. The working people around the world, we need to own the infrastructure that so that we can change the direction of the economy and therefore also of the climate. We need public ownership of the big oil companies because they're not going to stop. They're looking at the ground and it's gold. Why wouldn't you pull the gold out of the ground if it's just sitting there? They have no care for the fact that it's poisoning the planet and, of course, poisoning the human and all life forms. So I think for us, the big difference with us and the Green New Deal, a socialist Green New Deal, would have to include a control over the economy, of the commanding heights of the economy, if you like. And the financing for it, the money is there. It's the top, what was it? Top 15 banks in America own $13 trillion. That's $13,000 billion. It's just fucking, and Bezos himself during the pandemic, I don't know if you've seen about how rich the billionaires have got. A lot of those are West Coast billionaires and Californian billionaires, but Bezos himself, his wealth has increased so much that his 800,000 employees could be paid a bonus $105,000 each, and he would still only be put back to the wealth that he had at the beginning of the pandemic. It's madness, but they're not interested in dealing with it seriously. That's why the working class has to be in the driving seat.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it's completely insane that now people were literally profiting from this crisis, from the coronavirus crisis worldwide, but also from the fires, the hurricanes, climate change. It's insane. It's insane that we're all going to live in a planet that's going to be inhabitable in just a few years, and people are still benefiting from it so much that they're not doing anything about it. You know, I think you've mentioned the wealth that some billionaires have got, but like, the 3 richest men in America are hoarding as much wealth as the bottom half of the population. Like, how is that? How does that make sense? And if there's so much wealth there, why is it not being used to, solve this crisis, especially when we know that like just a few corporations, just 100 corporations are responsible for 70% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. So we know that problem doesn't lie with working class people not recycling. It lies with those corporations, and something has to be done about it. But with like, and I completely agree about the point about the socialist Green New Deal, because you can't solve this crisis without completely reorganizing the economy that caused this complete disparity between the people who hold the most wealth and the ones that don't have any. And talking about those political changes, I was wondering, obviously there's a new election in America soon, and I want to know, first of all, what's Trump's response been to the fires? And speaking of Trump, we know that the states that were affected on the West Coast are mainly kind of like Democrat safe zones. Does that mean that it's not going to have any impact on the elections, or do we think that it's still going to kind of change the view of what this election is going to be about?
Yeah, well, Trump, I mean, his position is the same as COVID, which is deny the science, which is, of course, the starting place that we have to have as Marxists, deny the science and then downplay the crisis. So, the things, it's not that bad, we've had this before and all the rest of it. And then also politically, I witnessed some of his campaign, how he's trying to get to his supporters, and he's ridiculing the liberals, saying, oh, they want you to only be able to watch TV when the wind is blowing hard enough and shit like that. So they're attacking the liberals' weak point, and the liberals are arguing what you've been saying about recycling and the rest of it, when in reality, the big contributors, 70% of global emissions come from the big corporations, and that they need to be tackled. So that's not being touched. In terms of the Republicans, 39% of Republicans in one poll said that they believe the environment is a priority. I imagine that's Republicans where they're losing their beachside properties because of rising sea levels, but it could be Florida, it could be California, it could be Texas, which are really affected by global warming. And 85% of Democrats think that it should be a priority. So I think that the problem is, of course, Biden is not willing to take the action that's necessary. And why we center taxing the rich is because if you don't, as you've said, if you don't address the systemic problems, the systemic inequality, then you're not going to have the resources to deal with the problem. If you throw peanuts at global warming, which is what they've been doing, it's not going to resolve the problem. We need dramatic. Young people are impatient. They want this resolved, and it's not getting resolved by either political party. Biden, for instance, is going for to increase the taxes on the rich to 28% from Trump's 21%. But under Obama, it was 35%. So they're just not addressing the crisis. Just one last quote from the California governor, who was this week. You saw him at the in a forest that had been flattened by the fires, and being very angry about global warming. He said he pledged not to sign any legislation in the state legislature that increased income taxes on the wealthy. So they're not going to deal with it. We need socialists in the state legislature.
I think that is an amazing thing to say with the context that we just talked about how much wealth people have received during this crisis, where the numbers of unemployment and working class people being completely thrown into poverty by the entire system, but especially these crises. It's absolutely ridiculous to say that, because by saying I'm not going to raise taxes on the rich, you're basically saying I'm not going to do even the bare minimum to deal with this problem, and it's absolutely ridiculous. And I think another ridiculous thing is saying that like you said, that Trump was saying it's not a big deal, those fires. I think just seeing that one photo that you showed us of before and after the fires shows how big of a deal it is. And like you said, I think workers and youth can't wait. They have a sense of urgency, and I was wondering what was the response of workers and youth, and also what needs to happen, what are demands, what are the next steps for California, for the West Coast, but generally for the world.
Yeah, well, there are demonstrations in the pipeline, but organized by the environmentalists and socialists. Some of the demands here in California is for the takeover of the public utility, the electric utility company, rather, which is privately owned, PG&E, which made something like $13 billion in profits only a couple of years ago. And they're now bankrupt because of lawsuits, because of their negligence around previous fires. But bringing them into public ownership is definitely a demand. Even for N95s, which is a small thing, but the governor was all radical in April and March and April about actually taking over the manufacture of N95s, kind of like taking it into public ownership and doing it right. Never happened. And so we still have hospitals without N95s. But in terms of getting out the street, it's been a bit difficult because today is day number 4 where you can walk outside. You can't plan ahead these days because you don't know what the air quality is going to be like. It's really that serious. We've had a long-term campaign in the last few months, Socialist Alternative, going door to door. We're campaigning against a particular slumlord who's a big evictor, and we've had to put it off. We had a tenants meeting organized. All the tenants were really enthusiastic about it. And renters in California, 1 in 5 families in California are food insecure right now. 150,000 Californians are homeless. This is a massive crisis of inequality, but getting out on the streets has been difficult because of the air quality. But now we have a reprieve, but we don't know if it's going to go back to red and purple, which are the color zones for whether you can actually even go outside with a mask. So it's been a bit complicated, but people want to get out and do something about this.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you so much. I think, yeah, it's a really difficult situation because, the situation is so bad that you can't go out and protest, but at the same time, going out and organizing is the only way to deal with it. So first of all, we want to say to everyone watching us from the US, please contact Socialist Alternative, get in touch. Let's get organized against it. And that also applies to anyone outside of the US, because this is a global crisis and we all need to organize against it, workers worldwide. And speaking about organizing and the need to organize and the rest of the world, I want to move to our next part of this episode, which is going to be about Belgium. So last week, a major protest of 7,000 workers was organized in Belgium by the activist network Santé and Lutte, which is probably not actually called that. I am very sorry. That's the best French pronunciation that I can do, so bear with me. In any case, it means health and struggle, and that's how I'm going to call it right from now on in English. The protest was organized in support of health workers and working conditions, with many participants from different sectors. And the PSL or LSP, which is the Belgian section of the International Socialist Alternative, participated too and actively mobilized for it. So I want to ask Celia, can you tell us a little bit about the movement? How did the demonstrations originate and what are the demands?
Yes, thank you, Yaara, and thanks ISA for the invitation and organizing this. I think we all should learn of how the collective began and how the methods are the good ones. The collective was born like 1 year ago. The first great assembly was 1 year ago. And they decided, so before the COVID crisis, they decided for a plan of action for better workers' condition, but also for higher wages, for more material, more staff, and of course, all of that with fundamentalizing public investment, of course. So they planned already a big demonstration that was normally for March 2020. They could not do it, obviously, with the COVID and the crisis in hospitals. So they changed the date for 13 September, and it became the symbol of the struggle post-lockdown. So they invented phrases that went rogue on like on Instagram and Facebook, like you counted your money, we are counting our debts. After the lockdown, we are settle our scores. Your profit, our debt, and the last one is the capital kills the hospital.
That is amazing. I think it really shows kind of like a consciousness about the problems of the system when it comes to health, but generally when it comes to, you know, like the health sector, but also general health amongst the public. And I was wondering, what did kind of like other sectors of the working class and the youth think about the protest? Did you see them at the protest? Do you see them as part of the movement?
Yeah, first of all, I should also say that in the collective, there's all workers inside. So from nurses to the cleaners of the hospitals, but also of the residential for elderly people. So also the one that are unionized and the one that are not. So it's very like complete collective. Everybody responds very good because we did all applaud at 8 o'clock in the evening during the lockdown for them. Also, of course, the government, but that's all. That's all. They didn't receive wages or money or more staff or more material. So yeah, during the demonstration, there was us, of course, WOSA. There were also climate youth. There were also social workers, teachers, firefighters. There were not as many people as expected because of the COVID, but also because of the trade union attitude. You know, that they back down and they say like, oh, be careful, it's dangerous. So that didn't help.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the trade unions because, as you say, it's really been like wide-reaching movement. So surely the trade unions must have some sort of impact on it. But as you said, it looks like they've been backing down. But the protest still went on, and even though it wasn't, you know, maybe as big as expected, it was still 7,000 people strong. So it's still quite a big protest. So I was wondering, first of all, what did the trade unions do? What do you think they should have done, and how will kind of like rank and file members and workers generally respond to the way the trade unions have treated this?
At first, the response was that we are all in the same boat. So as the bosses, as us, the workers and the unions. So the first response was not good at all, and not received well among the workers. Then, of course, the rank and file workers pushed them and forced the leadership of the trade union to how do you say it? I mean, not in action, because they didn't do something, but they were forced to call for the demonstration, officially. But I received an email, so that's not that's not a big thing. So yeah, they were forced to send emails, and they were forced to say, yeah, we are going to go. But of course, they didn't do much. So it's the collective that went to every hospital and talked to a lot of workers. Even in the street, there were everywhere the affiche of the demonstration, but the leadership of the trade union didn't do most of the real walk on the street that were to be done.
That's a real shame, because I think trade unions worldwide can do so much to fight against the way that the capitalist class has been dealing with the COVID crisis. And especially when there are protests that are being organized, unlike in other places, it's so important that trade union movement pushes for it. But I mean, if the leadership is not going to push for it, the rank and file and the working class is going to push for it. And that's what's happened, which is great. But I want to ask, if we talk about COVID, I know that the authorities tried to ban the protests with this excuse. So I want to ask you, what's happening with the pandemic in Belgium right now? What's the situation? And also, what kind of response did the state get when trying to stop the protests from happening?
Yeah, of course, they banned it because it was too dangerous with the COVID. Yeah, we know that all the lockdown restrictions were lifted, except the one linked to social life and the one linked to social struggle. So the mayor of Brussels, that is a member of the Socialist Party in Brussels, initially banned and took the decision to say no. So the Santé en Lutte made a decision to write a letter to the mayor, and had the letter signed by 1,000 health workers in 48 hours. The letter said, okay, you applauded us, you didn't do much in the crisis. You opened all the shops, all the schools are opened. You let us die during this crisis. And when we want to do one demonstration of a lot of people, maybe to ask for better conditions and for more money for the sectors, you say no, so that we cannot accept. They also made examples, for example, for a football stadium. It was accepted thousands and thousands of people in the stadium. That's one thing, and the demonstration was dangerous. So the mayor had to accept after this letter, so that really demonstrate how we can have some victory, and how things can change. So he had to accept it, of course, and he allowed the protest, although it was just a static protest in a group of 40, 100 people due to restrictions, but he had to accept it. So that's great. Also, you asked me about the second wave, or how we are in Belgium. We are, I mean, we are in the first wave, but in a peak in the first wave. So because of the school that we opened, the shops and everything we opened, but of course, it's only because the bosses wants to make profit again, like in every part in the world. The government and the bosses are not protecting us. And of course, we are having some factories that are in struggle for better conditions. It's only the workers that can really make a change and say, okay, example for the buses workers, they say, okay, we are not speaking to the person that are going up in the bus no more. So they put they had to put like a line like to say no, you cannot pass because they had no mask, nothing to protect them. So yeah, only the workers can say like, okay, we need that and that and that, like PP protections, and we forced you to with I don't know, with the shop steward that can maybe make a plan of action for forcing the bosses to do it. So yeah, the Belgium is like Brussels, maybe more is in a high peak. So that's another reason why the demonstration was more little that could have happened, because Brussels is yeah, is in a higher peak than other cities in Belgium.
Yeah, I think it's incredible to see how worldwide this crisis has shown time and time again that the capitalist class doesn't really care about the health of anyone else. All it cares about is the profits of the economy, which means the profits of the capitalist class, because we're not profiting from this at all. So yeah, I completely agree with what you said about having to organize, and the workers are the only ones who know how to deal with this and how to actually go back to work safely, and if they should go back to work safely. And speaking of which, I wanted to ask you, because obviously these demonstrations, especially in the context of COVID, have been really, really impressive. And what do you think is the next step of the struggle? What are the demands? How can they be achieved?
The next step is the 15th of October, when the collective has the next General Assembly. So the General Assembly, as they call them, is public. So everyone can go to, like the patients, but also all workers. So I remember, like the first one, I went as a teacher, because I'm a teacher, and I went saying that we agree, all teachers agree with them, and that we have the same demands for investment in the public sectors. So the next one, of course, it will be for talking how to put some pressure to the next governments, because we normally will have the next government in the 1st of October. So it will be like talking about the next plan of action, strike or no strike, strike in the public hospital only, or in public and private maybe. But of course, they have really good methods. So they really want to know, like, okay, if we do a strike, how many workers will be on strike? How many workers can we have in really in this strike? So they are very, I mean, they do it right. So yeah, this assembly should be very interesting. And the next next great topic of the assembly will be how can we continue to build this collective, and also in other cities, because we have this collective in three cities in Belgium, but the goal is to have in the collective in other cities. So yeah, it will be also to, okay, after the enthusiasm of the demonstration, what can we do to be in other cities and to be more powerful than we are already? So yeah, it will be that, and we will be present, of course. as PSL, as WOSA, but also, like I said, like me, for teacher, shop steward, we have other comrades that are gonna be there with the workers that they know, and that's, I mean, that's the way of building the struggle and building the party. So you have to do it in the same time.
That's brilliant. I think it's so inspiring to see what's happening in Belgium, and we actually have a comment about this from Nof from England, Wales, and Scotland. Nof saying, really inspiring to hear about how rank and file healthcare workers got organised in Belgium. In Britain, we also had protests of healthcare workers calling for a pay rise of 15% after Johnson hypocritically clapped for health workers but excluded them from getting a pay rise. So I think, yeah, the issues that you're talking about here, Celia, about issues that are definitely international. And it's also so inspiring to see how around the world there are people fighting and, protesting and going and fighting for their rights and for a pay rise that is absolutely needed in the context of this pandemic. And speaking of which, we've got our next item on today's episode, which is the Debenhams worker struggle in Ireland. So back in April, the retailer Debenhams, if you don't know, a big retail store, have announced the closure of their shops in Ireland, and the UK shops will be placed into administration. Now, this meant the loss of more than 2,000 jobs in Ireland, and to add insult to injury, workers learned about this closure via email only 30 minutes before the news broke out on media. And Debenhams were planning to give no redundancy pay and only rely on statutory pay, so basically pushing the costs on the taxpayers in Ireland. The Debenhams workers didn't sit idly by. They started occupying the shops, and the shops still have millions of euros worth of stock in them. So it's really significant. And the occupations have been going on now for the past 163 days. So there's really, really impressive struggle in Ireland right now. Michael, can you tell us a little bit about the struggle a little bit more, and how did it start? Where is it now? Where is it going?
Okay, well, I think it's fair to say that the Debenhams struggle is the outstanding worker struggle that's taken place in Ireland, not just in the course of the lockdown, but I would say in recent years. I mean, obviously, there's the adversity of it happening in the midst of the lockdown. That the announcement, by the time the announcement was made to the workers by a generic email that their jobs were gone in April, Ireland was in deep lockdown, highly restricted regulations in terms of people's ability to move around and so on. But as you say, at this point in time, I think it's the 164th day. So there's various milestones being passed, and again, comparisons made with other struggles in recent years of similar length. It's an overwhelmingly female workforce. Many of them have decades and decades of service. Even prior to Debenhams coming to Ireland, they took over a previous retail chain, Rocha store. So I think some have 30 years service and the likes. And basically, the workers took a firm view that because during the last round of redundancies in 2016, it was agreed that if there were any redundancies thereafter, that the workers would obtain 4 weeks pay per year service, which is actually twice the statutory minimum. And that's basically the promise that the workers have been trying to hold. Well, initially the company, but now the liquidator too, in the almost 6 months since the struggle began.
Yeah, I think this is a really inspiring struggle. We've been following it online a lot. I think, like you said, it's workers have been working for years and are offered literally nothing from this huge retailer. And I know that you've personally been involved in the pickets as part of your activity in the Socialist Party, which is the Irish party of the International Socialist Alternative. So I was wondering, can you tell us a little bit about the mood of the workers in the protest and pickets, and how are socialist activists accepted, like socialist activists like you, and also kind of the wider public opinion about it? Do people hear about it in Ireland? What do they think?
Well, I think it's best to begin by kind of explaining how the Socialist Party became involved in the first instance. Like, obviously, it's always been our practice to intervene into strikes, into workers' struggles from the very outset. But in this instance, A worker in Cork contacted Mick Barry, our TD, our MP, a member of the Irish Parliament, and then a worker in Dublin similarly contacted Ruth Coppinger, who was a former member of Parliament, both obviously members of the Socialist Party, seeking advice at the outset. And what we found was that there was the response from the trade union mandate, unfortunately, was quite routine. I think they were quite fatalistic in accepting what was being said by the company, that they had no money. And basically, after those initial contacts, we were able to quickly pull together and facilitate Zoom conference calls amongst workers. Initially, I think 60 to 70 workers, but it grew to over 100 by a certain point in time, spanning all 11 stores in the Republic of Ireland. And for the first couple of months, the protest actions that were organised had to be socially distanced, very tentative because of the strict regulations that were in place. But once the lockdown began to ease, the one shop after another began to mount pickets, in some cases 24-hour, 7-day-a-week pickets being maintained to prevent the liquidator removing stock from the stores to sell off, because if they sell off as things stand, they will use the proceeds to sort out business creditors, the banks and the revenue, but leave nothing for the workers. So quite militant pickets have been placed, for the last number of months, and Socialist Party members, and others from the left as well, have been regular participants in those pickets, supporting them all around the country. So, for the point of the mood of the workers, I think the mood has been very, very determined. Obviously, it's a very difficult struggle that has gone on for so long. There's pressure on the workers. Some of them have moved on and managed to get other jobs. I mean, effectively, they have been sacked. But they've managed very well to kind of hold the struggle together, as I say, in quite adverse circumstances.
Yeah, I think, again, this is so inspiring. And I can see that we have a comment from Ginger from the US, said that my entire Facebook timeline is the flood of Michael O'Brien and the Debenhams workers' actions, which I can relate to. And I think it's so good to see what all of the workers and how these protests and the pickets that have been going for 160 days now, over 160 days, how militant they still are, and how incredible the fights are. And I was wondering, we always talk about those pickets and those fights. I was wondering how have what was the union's role in this? Have they played any particular role in this struggle, and what can they do to help?
Well, just to put a bit of context on it, their union mandate, which organises in the retail sector principally, would have a certain reputation for being a more left union, in the sense that in the course of the austerity years, that they and some other unions would have broken with the Labour Party. They would have participated in the movement against the water charges. Their former General Secretary, they've just had a recent change of General Secretary, would have been associated with progressive causes like Palestine Solidarity. So they would have enjoyed that kind of reputation. However, we always had a clear view that, because of their involvement in other struggles in the retail sector, that they hadn't got a good record in successfully leading and organising struggles and having a militant industrial strategy to actually beat employers in various situations. So, as I said, that when the announcement was made that the jobs were gone, Mandate's initial reaction was just to process the statutory redundancy claims from the state social insurance fund. In other words, not to fundamentally contest what the company was saying. What was unique about this situation is that, we in our conversations with workers in all circumstances, will always advocate a fighting strategy. Sometimes it's difficult to win workers to that position. If there's inexperience or a lack of confidence, or if they give their union the benefit of the doubt. But in this instance, what was unique was that among the shop stewards, there were some that were actually had a fighting attitude, and amongst some of the worker activists, a fighting attitude from the very, very outset. So that's what made the difference now. So Mandate grossly underestimated the willingness of these workers to fight. However, Mandate could have made an adjustment and embraced that, and actually ran with it and mounted quite a significant militant campaign. And actually enhance their own reputation and enable them to organise thousands of other retail workers who are similarly threatened with job losses. But effectively, they have not adopted or embraced a struggle approach. Quite the opposite. That they are very fearful of the restrictive picketing and trade union laws in this country. So they've been very lukewarm, to say the least, about the militant pickets that have been placed that have prevented trucks going into the stores to remove stock. because they're fearful of the liquidator injuncting the union, bringing the union to court, and costs arising from that. Whereas actually what's been demonstrated in practice is that the liquidator is actually quite nervous about going down the road of injunctions, because they are aware of the deep levels of support in wider Irish society, particularly amongst the working class, for the Debenhams workers. So a lot of political pressure has been generated, not just on the liquidator, but on the government as well. It's been a regular feature in the Irish Parliament, through RTD and other left TDs, members of Parliament, raising it time and again, because the government do have some culpability around this, around the liquidation laws in Ireland that put workers at the bottom of the heap, behind business creditors and the revenue when companies go bust.
That is an absolute disgrace, especially when you're talking about workers in a situation of a pandemic. It's not like it's going to be easy to find another job right now. And if we're talking about workers that have been working in the same place for so long, it's even worse and it's even harder in COVID or out of COVID. Because as we said before, there's been so much about this, I think, even outside of Ireland, we've heard about it. And especially, I think, anyone who has been a socialist activist has been really, seeing it everywhere. And I was wondering, first of all, what can socialists in Ireland do to help? But also, what can socialists internationally do to support the struggle and to help the Debenhams workers struggle?
Well, in the case of Ireland, I mean, what we've tried to do is offer very practical support and advice to the workers about various initiatives, protest initiatives, but also try to build support within the wider trade union movement. Like, there has been support from individual trade union branches, financial support, practical support for demonstrations and other initiatives, assisting the workers have their voice heard in the media, because that's been extremely effective. I mean, again, just to give a concrete example, you mentioned the occupations. The occupations are actually relatively short-lived in the context of the 160-plus day struggle. But what happened was the liquidator made a very derisory offer to the workers, about 1/10 of what they were looking for a number of weeks ago. Unfortunately, that offer was supported by the union leadership and was reported in the mainstream media as this very significant breakthrough. And the union was going to rush to try and ballot on that deal. And if you like, there was a counter-offensive required by the workers, into the media to try and get the point across that it wasn't a good offer. So they took various initiatives in terms of just speaking on radio programs, issuing a letter to the union leadership saying that this offer did not warrant a ballot, press statements on the rest of it. But actually the occupations that took place in Cork and in Dublin were intended to really drive the point home that to the public at large and to the government that this was not an acceptable offer and it should be withdrawn, and it was withdrawn by the liquidator. So the struggle is ongoing. So, but we would have had a lot of dialogue with the workers throughout all of these developments down the line. In terms of the international dimension, I mean, just to make the point as well that it's not just a case of Debenhams having a chain in the UK, in Britain, but also they had an operation in Bangladesh, and the workers in Bangladesh were unceremoniously sacked as well. And actually some of the Irish workers took the initiative of setting up a GoFundMe and actually raising thousands of euro for the workers in Bangladesh, which I just thought was exemplary internationalism on the part of the workers here in Ireland. Obviously there are links with the situation in Britain. We've been in dialogue with our comrades in Socialist Alternative in England, Scotland and Wales. I think it's been difficult in Britain to get a similar level of struggle up and running amongst Debenhams workers. I think that they're dealing with a situation, I think so far, I think of 2,500 job losses being announced, although I do know that Debenhams have also advertised jobs at £8 an hour over there. I know particularly in Manchester, there has been a succession of protests, and I have observed on social media some protests taking place outside other stores. Latterly, I think the workers are less well organised in Britain, unfortunately, compared to the workers in Ireland that are highly unionised. But I think our comrades in Britain have been going to bring in, from a very early stage, news to the workers in Britain, that there has been a very significant fight waged in Ireland in order to try and raise their sights, so that's extremely important.
Thank you so much. I think the points that you've highlighted about how this is in its nature an international struggle, even though we're talking about mainly the workers in Ireland, but also there's in Bangladesh, and also there's some situation with Denmark and obviously the UK. So I think it's really important, and I think first of all, obviously, these countries should be at the forefront of fighting and supporting the struggle in Ireland. But generally, we need this kind of solidarity of everyone internationally, of all workers, retail workers and otherwise, to fight for these closures, because it's not just Debenhams, it's not just, you know, chains in Ireland. It's either happening or going to happen worldwide in the next few months. So I really agree with that, and I know that like my branch and the other London branch in Britain have actually gone to the Debenhams headquarters a few months ago and tried to talk to the chairperson. They originally told us that they might let us do that, but obviously they didn't. But I think like just raising the consciousness of the workers in those shops is really, really important, especially in the context of not being able to, you know, properly go into shops that might not necessarily be open. And I think a lot of them, even if they're not completely closed, they are not open to the public right now. So I think this is, again, an inspirational struggle that everyone internationally should be supporting, should be sending letters of support to the workers, and really keep an eye on it, because it's going to be big, and it's already big. And I want to kind of take the last 5 minutes of the broadcast to talk about our shout out of the week. So as you know, this is when we talk about one inspirational thing that happened this week, we want to highlight something amazing the workers have done and give our appreciation to the work. So this week, I want to talk about Seattle Council member and Socialist Alternative US member, Shama Sawant. Now, Shama has been under threat of being recalled. It's not surprising, because Shama has been making the ruling class shake in their boots for a very long time now. That's in Seattle, it's across the US, but also worldwide. The ruling class, when they see what she's doing in Seattle, they are really, really afraid. And that's with her support for the Tax Amazon campaign, as well as a successful campaign to raise the minimum wage a few years back to $15 an hour, which really led a wave of other states to follow. And more recently, Shama angered the capitalist class by allowing Black Lives Matter protesters to enter City Hall in Seattle for the purposes of an occupation. So her unyielding support for working class movements and the way that she has been using a council position to represent the interests of the working class and of our movements have been an inspiration to us all. So it's really no wonder that some people, the same people that she's working against, are trying to get her recalled. Now, this week, a judge ruled that the campaign to get her recalled can proceed. Again, this is not surprising. No one is shocked by this. The state is going to do anything in its power to keep socialists from power. So obviously, the judges are going to help them do that. And I want to quote Shama's speech from after the court decision was made, because I think she put it way better than I could ever have. She said, "While working people should be angry at this outcome, we should not be surprised. The laws and courts and police under capitalism do not serve working people, people of color, those already marginalized under capitalism. They are made to hold us down. They are made to hold up the status quo of deep inequality, of violence, of racism, sexism, of ruthless exploitation of the whole working class and the environment." So I think this, if anything, that just sums up everything that we talked about today, but also the way that working class people should look at this recall decision. Obviously, she hasn't been recalled yet, but the judge allowed it to proceed. But we shouldn't be surprised by a capitalist institution trying to get rid of socialist working class representatives, because they're not benefiting from it, and if anything, it's scaring them a lot. So as we've said so much, the ruling class are afraid. We all know that, and like true socialists, we know that the fight comes from the streets. At the same time, Shama is also appealing the judge's ruling, so we want to support as much as possible. And I want to send international solidarity to our organization in the US, and especially in Seattle, and of course to Shama. Thank you for leading this movement and helping working class people worldwide. So I really want to shout out the shout out this week, and please give your support in the comments as well. And now we've come to the end of our show. So thank you so much for watching, and make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel as well as like our Facebook page. And of course, join us. If what you've heard today, and I'm sure that what you've heard today was some really inspirational struggles. And they're not the only ones worldwide. The International Socialist Alternative is active in over 30 countries all across the world, in every single continent. So no matter where you're based, if you like what you've heard today, please make sure to go to internationalsocialist.net and fill out our sign-up sheet. Let's fight together. But in the meantime, I want to say thank you for watching, and I will see you next week. Same time, same place. Bye-bye.